Welcome on in to the Full Court Press. Jason Walker here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM The Fan. Streaming online at 1069thefan.com and on the 1069 The Fan mobile app. Also streaming live on YouTube. The Fan at KLGN is where you can find video streams of our shows and, of course, video replays as well of our full 2-hour show. Glad to have you on. Glad I could be here. I'm solo today because I thought Eric was going to be back today, despite the fact that I think he warned me he might not be back today. Like he was saying Monday, Tuesday, and I think he said maybe Wednesday, although I interpreted that as more likely than not that he'd be here. So we had Ajay on Monday, JD on yesterday, but I forgot I had to get a guest host for today. So it'll be just myself here talking Utah State hoops mainly in the first hour. The transfer portal is closed, so we need to take stock of where Utah State is, where their rotation is as of right now, the lineups, maybe get a guess of a starting lineup, who would maybe start if we were setting the lineup right now at each of the positions. What does Utah State still need to do? We did go over that yesterday. Me and JD talked about some of the positions that they still needed. Of course, we had certainly a long discussion that just about got into a full-on argument about whether or not the Aggies had done enough to generate some hype. I know we had some texts come in on that subject. We'll get to those in a second. But obviously, with some work still to do, where do things look right now? We'll also look at the rest of the Pac-12. I went through, did a little bit of updating. There wasn't a ton of updating that needed to be done, but I wanted to look at who in the Pac-12, returning production was kind of the main thing there. Returning production, updating a few transfers. How are some of the teams doing? I finally looked at transfer class rankings, using Evan Mia is kind of my go-to. I know like 247 Sports and On3 have their portal rankings. Wanted to use Evan Mia, although sometimes I feel like his portal rankings aren't always as kind to mid-majors who their portal recruits tend to be ranked really low. Like MJ Collins was ranked really low, I think, if I remember correctly, in the transfer ratings, and he ended up being pretty solid. But still, it'll give us an idea of maybe who's doing well in the transfer portal so far. So if you want to join the show, talk about any of these discussions, text 435-339-0321. So a few texts. I'm not going to read necessarily all parts of all of them because I do want to. I know we had this discussion with JD yesterday, and texters have sided more with me on this discussion about how much Utah State is doing. I know 2444 saying the Aggies will be just fine and competing at the top of the Pac-12, and I have confidence that they will do that, but. Again, I voiced some concerns. They weren't as great as JD's because, again, the big disagreement was, are they bringing in the caliber of recruit to compete? At least if I'm remembering the exact point. Again, I don't want to misrepresent anyone, but it just came down to, are they bringing in the caliber of player? Talking about, are they bringing in, last year you had the best high school recruiting class in history from top to bottom, and this year, while you are bringing back Mason, Carson Templin, you're bringing back two of the, that vaunted recruiting class from last year. And I think that's something that really needs to be put into the discussion because part of how you generate hype is who you're bringing back. And so I think that is something that is really important. 2982 actually making that point on the text line themselves, saying, I think we're forgetting that Mason Falsa returning is the biggest re-signing in Aggie basketball history, especially in the transfer portal era. He is literally the Mountain West Player of the Year. He'll be just fine. There's another text from 2982. I need to. Yeah, saying there's way too much negativity about the men's basketball roster on yesterday's show. There wasn't a single splashy commitment in last year's cycle, and 4 or 5 of them. And 4/5 of them played a significant role. Trust the coaching staff. They get paid to identify talent. Yeah, and that's something that, that was a point I tried to make, is that last year's recruiting class didn't have a splashy commit. And yet they brought in contributors. of course, the key there is that they brought in players that you could tell definitely had a lot of potential. Like MJ Collins had a lot of potential, his athletic ability, coming from the power conference ranks. Colby King had spent time in the power conference ranks. They brought in players, and they brought in Zach Keller, who played at the power conference level. That's, MJ Collins and Zach Keller, that's two of your starters. Mind you, Zach didn't start, or he didn't play a ton. Though he did start and he did have a contributing role. Colby King and MJ Collins both had significant roles. So really, it just comes down to, do you think the Aggies need to get players from the power conference level? Like, do you need to get that caliber of players to be able to maximize, your transfer portal recruiting process? And I've expressed it. I think when JD brings up, you need a good number two, like who's the number two? I think that should come from a power conference transfer down. Ian Martinez and MJ Collins were great, kind of models of that role, that archetype of bring a guy who wasn't having success at the power conference level, give them an opportunity. They have the tools to be, with Ian Martinez and MJ Collins, they led the Aggies in scoring. At least I think Ian, like both Ian and Mason were like either slightly above, or Ian and MJ, excuse me. I think MJ was slightly above Mason. Ian was slightly above or slightly below Mason. I can't remember who was the leading scorer 2 years ago. But that's something that I think the Aggies could really use. Unless AJ Bates turns into that, unless Braden Bowe turns into that. But I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket if I'm Utah State. But that's where you got 5 roster spots left to fill. So we'll see. 9315 saying, Eric not making it back on time. I'm so not surprised. I don't want to say that he's not making it back on time, because this could be like me not remembering when he was going to be back. But I thought I remembered him saying that he might be back today. 935 also saying the guest host for today, drum roll. You got that right? The text line. Yes, that's the text line will be the co-host for today's show. 2444 also texting this in, saying, lol, I think Perryman has already been recruited over. Then sending, they signed the kid out of Tulsa, Cincinnati did. I forget his name, was like Tyler something. I'm clicking on the link. Yeah, Tylen Riley. Former Tulsa guard. Yeah, so Elijah Perriman, he committed to Cincinnati, was a day or two ago. I can't remember if we actually brought it up on the show, but I think it was this week that Elijah Perriman committed to Cincinnati. And yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to have a big role. He's going to have a smaller role, I think, at Cincinnati than he did here at Utah State. We'll see if he ends up regretting that. Well, or maybe, who knows? Maybe he'll rise above all that. He is a talented point guard. Question is, can he, where he'll be a sophomore next year, can he rise above players who were, all conference level players this past season? 9938 saying, I think a good sign for basketball recruits is if they have proven improvement in their college career. Yeah, you certainly like to see that. Like when players have, if they don't have the greatest stats, like have they improved, or do they show a path toward improvement? That's something that, I'll look at. MJ Collins had a path toward improvement. Ian Martinez, I think he'd shown some improvement. So, but I think another thing with that is, can they fit? Like, as I've looked at Utah State's players, I'm really liking for Utah State the level of fit that I'm seeing from these players. Now, I haven't gone fully in depth on AJ Bates or Solomon Callahan, to be honest, Jax Allen or Jordan Boyd, though I'm not sure either of those two are going to play big roles on this year's roster. But I've just about finished up my Sean Feltz breakdown article. That should be coming out probably tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to be finishing up putting together kind of the clips, the video clips that I usually put in those articles to help kind of visualize the stuff that I'm trying to put into writing. So, because I think the written portion of the article is pretty much done. But as I look at these players, I'm seeing a Utah State team that has a bunch of players that are really capable of fitting together in Ben Jacobson's system. Because it's not just a bunch of guys that are just, I think I was saying this yesterday. This isn't like 2K, NBA 2K, where you just get a bunch of guys of a certain rating, or, if, since we're living in real life, we can't see everyone's 2K ratings. You look at their points per game, rebounds per game, and all this kind of stuff. You need to find somebody who fits within the system. And so let's look at, Sean Feltz, Will Hornseth, AJ Bates. With Ben Jacobson running such a pick and, there's so many pick and rolls, there's so much of that where they're working with ball screens, handoffs, different things like that. And, pass to the roll man, or, skip passes over the roll man to the shooter in the corner, that kind of stuff. Ben Jacobson is bringing in guys who can score in those specific scenarios. He's not bringing in just any big who can put up a bunch of points, because, while you can usually find ways to set up a back to the basket score, those guys are a little more expensive. So he's found guys who can score in the scenarios that Ben Jacobson's offense is going to put them in. So when I look at Will Hornseth and Sean Feltz, I think Carson Templin fits into this as well, but I'm going to focus on Will and Sean. But those players in pick and roll situations, they're good screen setters. Then they're going to roll to the basket, and Sean Feltz, he can be a lob target that Mason, he was an improving, lob passer. He was trying to break that out. He was doing that with Abin Gadarazzi. Did a little bit, I think, with Isaac Johnson, where, trying to, throw these lob passes in pick and roll situations, but they didn't really have that as much last year. Mason Falsa didn't really have a lob target, but he'll have one in Sean Feltz. And in AJ Bates, he'll be able to pass to Will Hornseth, Sean Feltz, Carson Templin. And in these pick and roll situations, you have players that can score at multiple levels. They're not just a lob target where the only thing they can do is catch passes and throw down dunks. No, you have players who, once they catch it, catch a pass to the roll man, from there, and it actually kind of goes back to Calhoun talked about players being able to make good decisions below the free throw line, going from the free throw line in. Will Hornseth, Carson Templin, and Sean Feltz are all players who can make good decisions below the free throw line. They also have tools. It's not just, okay, we got to drive and just go at the rim, and my only option is to try and get a point blank shot. All of these guys can score in and around the paint and at multiple levels of the paint. I talk about the floater that all of those players have. I've just spent a bunch of time scouting Will Hornseth and Sean Feltz, where a lot of their shots are like a 5 to 8 foot floater. And those are shots that they are viable in that create opportunities to score. And not just create opportunities to score, but they're ways they can score within Ben Jacobson's offense. And so that's where, if you're looking at the roster as it is right now, you're seeing players who fit really well. It's not just that they have a shooter and a point guard and a former player of the year. And, the guy, Will Hornseth following, Ben Jacobson from Northern Iowa. They have a bunch of players who I think really fit within the team. Now we'll see how Braden Bowe and Kingston Tosi fit into this, but I think that they certainly have, I think Braden Bowe fits really well in terms of guards, because I think he'll be able to run stuff out of the pick and roll really well, in addition to the other players obviously on the roster. Though I think Kingston Tosi and Braden Bowe, obviously they were recruited by Calhoun, and so when I look at them, they might fit a little bit better into the Calhoun offense, but there's more than one offense that a good player can fit into. And so I think with coaching and being with Ben Jacobson, I think that they're going to be very viable players. Let's get to back to the Young Power Sports of Logan, Texas. Then we'll get into maybe who I think might start for the Aggies, or how things would look right now, and maybe what types of players may end up jumping into the starting lineup ahead of guys that I've maybe tentatively penciled in to that rotation. But 8968 saying, when it comes down to it, the transfer portal is a crapshoot. You hope when you throw the dice. You hope when you throw the dice. You hope it comes. All you can do is hope it comes up good. I hope we don't put too much pressure on Mason and Carson. They are just human, from what I've seen. I mean, they definitely are. Like, and you don't want to bank everything on, well, we have Mason and we have Carson, and that's going to make everything okay. Like, having those two provides you a baseline of how good you can be. But if the Aggies go 19-17, like, I don't know if that adds up to however many games you'd play, but yeah, Mason and Carson by themselves, plus adding, some of the guys they have, like, they can get that, but that would be a disappointment for the Aggies. And so the difference between maybe winning 20 games or maybe winning 21 or 22, where that would be a slight disappointment, the difference between doing that versus another 28-win season, well, that's making sure you hit on all your transfer portal recruits. That's making sure you're getting the most out of all of the returners, not just Mason and Carson, but also Braden Bowe and Kingston Tosi as well. 5452 texting in saying Calhoun leaving throws a wrench into things, but every chance Calhoun has had to open his mouth, he was complaining about a lack of financial resources. Donors stepped up like never before. I'd like to see a legit big man sign, something the Aggies desperately need. I think this is along the lines of what JD was saying. Yes, Mason was a huge retain, but seeing what Oregon State is doing in the portal seems to be much better than what Utah State has done. Obviously, fit plays a huge factor. Underwhelmed. Hopefully, I am proven wrong. Yeah, and I think, and again, this is where, and I may not see exactly eye to eye in this discussion with JD, but you understand like the desire to have that splashy portal recruit. Like Calhoun was whining for 2 years, whining or begging, however you want to view it, wanting a big man. The Aggies haven't signed. Like they're talking about having more NIL funds than ever before, and they signed Sean Feltz, who is a situational big. He can, there are some things he can do. I have a full breakdown, about 2,000 words about it. But he's a center that will play 15 minutes per game, assuming that they don't recruit over him, which I think there's a lot of Aggie fans that are hoping they recruit over Sean Feltz. There's a lot that are hoping he's like the fourth or, the second center essentially, but potentially your third, big behind having Carson, Will, Hornseth, and again, a lot of people hoping that the Aggies sign a center. Like, that was part of the thing with the donor stepping up, is that you can make the expensive transfer portal signing. And so I understand that, that desire, but also like part of the money that would have gone towards signing a splashy portal recruit, that went to keeping Mason and Carson. And if the Aggies were signing players of at least Mason's caliber, I don't know if Carson coming out of the portal, like, I don't know what, like, if you got like the A10 sixth man of the year, I don't know if that's roughly equivalent, but I don't know if that would count as a splashy portal recruit. But like keeping, bringing back someone like Mason, like Oregon State has, the NIL funds they do. I don't know exactly how much they have, but they're able to make a lot of these bigger portal signings because they have a completely empty roster. And now I think that, they do have the completely open roster, and that's helped them a little bit. I still think they've done a pretty good job even in context. But still, while you may want to sign the player who's averaged 16, 17 points per game, Utah State doesn't necessarily have the money to throw at that player, or at least I don't think they do. I think they're still trying to ball on a budget here. And that's where you're not seeing them sign the 7'1" big. Well, of course, most of whom are just getting signed to, $500,000 and $800,000 contracts or $1 million contracts. So I can understand wanting that big portal addition. But I think the biggest thing is making sure you cover all of your bases in terms of things that you need on the roster. The biggest things they need right now are find at least another possibility for a guy who can be the number 2 scorer on this team, where you're not shifting all that into hoping that AJ Bates improves from being a 37% shooter, or hoping that Braden Bowe turns into essentially Mason Falslev's redshirt freshman season, hoping he puts in a season like that. So those are some of the things that I think Utah State needs to go after. Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll talk a little bit about if Utah State were to start the season today for whatever reason, who would they throw out there in a starting lineup? What would their rotation maybe look like? And in getting that view, we'll also kind of look at, okay, here are the types of players that Utah State may still be looking to add. So we'll get to that next here on the Full Court Press. Feel the love with Mountain Valley Heating and Air. The nominations for their latest giveaway are now open. Last year, they gave away 5 complete heating and air systems to deserving families. And in 2026, they're hoping to give away 10 complete heating and air systems. So you can nominate a family in need at mtnvalleyhvac.com. That's mtnvalleyhvac.com. Talking so much on doing the hardest part of doing a solo show is wearing your voice out. But welcome back into the Full Court Press. Jason Walker here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM The Fan, and streaming online at 1069thefan.com and on the 1069 The Fan mobile app. We welcome you on in however you're listening. If you want to join the show, be today's co-host, text 435-339-0321. And we have a few texts coming in, 2444 texting in, saying, should we read into this photo as to whether or not Luke Kearney may actually be staying And since I can't show a photo, well, I could, but I have to like do a bunch of fancy stuff on the stream. But and even those listening on radio can't hear it. But it was a group picture. I believe it was either President Mortensen or Cam Walker had like a bunch of the basketball players and coaches over for dinner. And a lot of the basketball players are there, like just looking at it's Carson Templin, Kingston Tosi. I believe that's Braden Bowe. The picture's a bit small. Mason, and then Luke Kearney and Zach Keller actually are all in this photo. And it's harder to read into that because, you know, being invited to a dinner like this, a lot of it's maybe just about how close are some of these players to each other. I mean, Zach Keller, he's someone who's leaving. Of course, he's leaving due to graduation, not because of the transfer portal. I don't know if I read Luke Kearney's post fully where he was announcing that he was leaving. So I can't remember if the wording made it sound like he was definitively leaving. My biggest thing is like he couldn't get into last year's rotation. And I don't know if there is a significant path to improvement where he's necessarily viable on a Pac-12 roster. So I'm not sure that Utah State. This sounds harsh to say, but like I think Utah State, where if he comes back, he'd be on the back end of the roster again. That's just how I'd put it, I guess. So like I think this next year is his last season. So he's someone that if you're talking about someone who wants to maximize his playing time, then that's the kind of player that often transfers. And, you know, cause like, you know, with Jordy Barnes transferring, going down to UVU, get some playing time. You know, Isaac Davis obviously did the same thing, Isaac Johnson. And I think Luke Kearney can be in that same vein where probably needing to transfer if he wants playing time. I mean, if he wants to come back, then we'll see. He's already entered the portal, so it'd be up to Ben Jacobson to bring him back. But if you are looking for signs for Luke Kearney to come back, the fact that he was at a dinner with a bunch of the players, that's not the worst sign in the world. Because that's something he very easily could have skipped because he's like, well, I'm on my way out and don't need to make it awkward. But again, that could just be if he knows the players, obviously he knows the players, he's on a roster with them for an entire year. It could just be something where like he recognizes that he's leaving, but could still want to hang out with these guys. Because a lot of these players stay close even when they're transferring away. They still keep in contact with each other. Getting to some other text, 9315 saying, the nice thing is we got somebody from Snow College. If you're looking at Utah State history, you've had amazing players that have up their game that came from Snow College. I can't remember, because Drake Allen, I'm pretty sure it came from Snow College, unless I'm misremembering. So he went from like Snow College to, I think it was SUU and then Utah Valley, I think was the path that he ended up taking. And then he comes to Utah State. So he kind of took the really long way around. And then technically Jax Allen was kind of at Snow College this past spring. So yeah, like Snow College produces good players. And Sean Feltz is ranked like 19th on like JUCOrecruiting.com for like, 19th best overall JUCO recruit for this season. Khalifa Sacco was actually pretty high on that list as well, and he turned out to be a decent player. Ended up playing for Houston, so he was someone who's able to up his game where he came from South Plains College. 8968 saying, with the size of Cache Valley and the lack of money for stuff of this sort, I think the Aggies are doing quite well. I still got along the lines of recruit a team, not just a player. Give me a good team any day over one superstar. Yeah, so this is all. It's going to be about recruiting the right players, though. We'll see if Ben Jacobson's able to land a high-level player that still fits within his system. Because obviously, if you landed someone like Mason, I think Mason fits the system. So can you get someone like that? Obviously, they're probably not going to be landing a top 100, transfer portal recruit, which is where Mason would fit. He would probably be in the top 30 in terms of portal recruits for this season. But we'll see what Ben Jacobson is able to get. So let's look at Utah State's roster and kind of I'll do some kind of spitballing live on air here. I've given this some thought. I'm not going into this blind, but what would the starting lineup look like? What would some of the rotations look like? What would some lineup combinations be that they could try? And then what are some archetypes of players that I think would be good to fill in some of the gaps that we see right now? So right now, if you're looking at a starting lineup, you would likely be seeing AJ Bates, Mason Falslev, at the 1 and the 2. And then I think at the 4 and the 5, and I'll talk about the 3 in a second here, but the power forward and center, I think Sean Feltz starts at center. And if they end up bringing in another 7-footer who is better than Sean Feltz, then okay, you put in that. I think Utah State is going to start Sean Feltz or some other 6'11", 7-foot player at that 5. I think that's a fairly likely situation, but you'll see that player unless they landed like a superstar or someone who ends up becoming an all conference level center. You will likely see Utah State go back to what they've done with centers for like the last 5 years. Trevin Dorius, Abin Gadarazzi, Isaac Johnson. There's another one in there I'm forgetting. Well, Zach Keller this last year, where you have these 6'10", 7-foot centers that start, but of those 4 guys I mentioned, like Isaac Johnson started most of the games the final year he was at Utah State. Abin Gadarazzi started almost every single game. Zach Keller, after about the first third of the season, he started every single game. So all of these guys, between those 4 players that I listed off, they probably had like 120 starts between them in like that senior year or their last year. Some of these players transferred after before their senior year, like Trevin Dorius went to UVU, Isaac Johnson went to Hawaii, Abin and Zach both graduated from Utah State. But like all 4 of those players, again, combined for about 120 starts, but Abin Gadarazzi had the highest minutes per game out of any of them. He averaged 17, almost 18 minutes per game. A lot of those other guys were averaging 14, 15 minutes per game. They were not playing a lot, but they were starting. And that's something you see a lot from college coaches is starting centers, but then maybe going to a small ball lineup or dipping into your bench pretty quickly. And so I think that's something you'll see from the Aggies front court. Now, which of Will Hornseth or Carson Templin would start at power forward? Just flip a coin, I guess. Probably Carson. They're investing a little bit more money in him, so they probably put him at power forward. And so you have him and Sean Feltz starting in the front court, but then you'd probably pretty quickly go to Will Hornseth and Carson Templin. I've gone on at length about that potential pairing. And there's a lot of things I like. There's some things that we'll see exactly how the Aggies are able to make it work defensively. But I think that they would likely shift to that Carson Templin, Will Hornseth lineup while playing Sean Feltz or another center, again, about 15 minutes per game, while having the bulk of their power forward and center minutes played by Templin and Hornseth. Although throw in, we've talked about Ben Schweiger. Will he get another year of eligibility? Does he come to Utah State? Or someone like him, a 6'7", 6'8", stretch 4, that's someone who could fill in some power forward minutes so that you're not having one of Carson Templin or Will Hornseth always playing power forward. Because you do want some lineups where you have a more versatile forward. Though I should mention Kingston Tosi fits into that mold of the more versatile power forward. So that's kind of what's going on in the front court. Probably the biggest hole where I'm not sure about right now is at small forward. I don't think the Aggies have, or I would kind of hope on their behalf, that they don't currently have their starting small forward on the roster. Again, unless Braden Bower or Kingston Tosi end up earning that role over anyone else they bring in, that's about the only way I would hope they have their current small forward on the roster. Just because you'd rather have Mason play shooting guard, have AJ Bates next to him, and then bring in somebody. You'd like to see your number 2 scorer coming at that small forward spot, again, with Ian Martinez and MJ Collins. I think that's where the biggest hole is. And with that, bringing in that small forward, that allows you to have Solomon Callahan coming off the bench, Braden Bowe coming off the bench. It allows you to have Kingston Tosi come in either at small forward or power forward, probably more power forward. And so that's where I think there's kind of this gap right now, because sure, you could build a lineup. Like if I had to build a starting lineup out of this current roster, it's AJ Bates, AJ Bates, Mason Falslev, Solomon Callahan, Carson Templin, and Sean Feltz. Throw in Will Hornseth for Carson Templin if you like, or swap him in for Sean Feltz, whatever you want to do. But like that would kind of be the starting five that I would throw out right now if I had to pick players currently on the roster. But I think bringing in a small forward that can start, that's where you begin to get a little bit more depth. Because if you have to start Solomon Callahan, he is capable of starting. He is capable of playing those minutes. But so was Colby King. But part of what made Colby King really great is that he was a starting caliber player, playing sometimes starting minutes, but he was able to come off the bench. And that's where the strength of Solomon Callahan is. That's the strength of Carson Templin. Like Carson Templin could come off the bench yet again next year. And it's not that Carson Templin's a bad player who has to come off the bench, but one of the biggest things about his value is that he can come off the bench. You're giving one of your starters a rest while having still one of your best players on the court. And so that's where the Aggies need to be able to find, I think there's one more spot in the starting lineup that needs to be filled by a transfer player. Every other position, I think, has a starting caliber player for the Pac-12 at it. At point guard with AJ Bates, the biggest thing is find a backup ideally you find someone who would compete with Bates, like where the Aggies had Drake Allen and Dayton Albury the first year with Calhoun. That was a really nice point guard rotation to have because he had two guys that were basically equal with each other. Now this last year, it was very much Drake Allen ahead of Elijah Perryman, but you still had, a very viable backup point guard. So the Aggies need to bring in another point guard. I think obviously they will. They've got 5 spots to fill. They're going to add some point guards. But right now, I'd say the biggest needs come in at backup point guard, starting small forward, or if you want to move Mason to small forward, again, it's, you like to have a little bit more length, but if you bring in another 6'3", 6'4" guard, whether Mason is technically playing shooting guard or small forward, I guess isn't that big of a deal. But I'd lean toward wanting someone 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" to be able to play that wing position. And so that's kind of where I'm looking at right now. It's where I'm looking at the rotation, a potential starting lineup, along with some other holes. Let's take another break here. When we come back, we'll talk about the rest of the Pac-12. Where are some of these other Pac-12 teams sitting? What are the players they've brought in? I mentioned Evan Mia transfer portal rankings. Where do all of the teams in the Pac-12 currently sit? We'll talk about that next here on the Full Court Press. Welcome on back to the Full Court Press. Jason Walker here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM The Fan. As we continue talking Utah State sports here on The Fan. Although shifting a little bit toward the Pac-12, though 9315 bring up a point saying Ben Jacobson adding all these assistant coaches. What are the odds that a player follows one of them to Utah State? And so Utah State has basically been adding, like, they announced, and they did this like one by one. They announced like all of the assistant coaches for this upcoming season. Jeffrey Grizzell, Barrett Peary, though that had been reported a little earlier. Haley Langstrat, Gameli Alegb. I can't say that. One of the assistant coaches. PJ Hogan. So they've had, 5 players to the staff over the course of like a day and a half. So PJ Hogan, Gameli. Oh, they have the pronunciation guide on his name. I remember reading this this press release, or at least I thought they did. I could have sworn they had a pronunciation guide in the press release that I read about this gentleman. A lot of these guys followed him from Northern Iowa. Barrett Peary, also an assistant coach. Jeffrey Grizzell, he's the assistant coach and video coordinator. Haley Langstrat is director of basketball ops. Still got Brandon Buskey, strength and conditioning. So, yeah, a lot of there's still some holdover from last year's staff, but 4 assistant coaches announced between yesterday and today. Now, I don't know if they're going to necessarily bring players over. I know Barrett Peary is one where he has ties to, I think, Utah and Vegas. I think he was formerly at Las Vegas or UNLV. And then I think he has ties to Utah. I forgot exactly what those terms. Did he have specific ties to Utah? I couldn't remember. He's got a lot of experience. But yeah, we'll see if any of them, like, a lot of times you'll sign assistant coaches and that helps you sign a player. Like Wes Brooks has had that with where he's signed assistant coaches, and then those assistant coaches help him land good recruits as he's hired them. There are several players on Utah State's roster who are there largely because of relationships through assistant coaches or through Wes Brooks himself, obviously. So the Aggies are finally getting through with their coaching staff. Ben Jacobson was basically the only one on the coaching staff, the coaching section of the roster. Now he's got 4 friendly faces joining him on the coaching staff, and then a couple joining for the support staff. But want to look toward the Pac-12 as we're talking about the transfer portal being closed. No more players can enter the portal. Now, there may be, like, if you see, so-and-so has entered the transfer portal, if there was somebody that entered today with that, or if you see somebody tomorrow where it says so-and-so has entered the transfer portal, it's because they entered their name before the portal closed, and it's only now being processed, or it's only now being announced. But that's probably something you're only going to see maybe today or tomorrow, at most, maybe a little bit later this week. But I'd be incredibly surprised if we saw something like a week or two down the line saying they're entering the portal, because at that point, why didn't you say something earlier? So, assuming that all players are accounted for, that everyone who didn't enter the portal is going to return, because there were a decent number of players that when I was tracking the Pac-12 players on my Google sheet, like, there were some who didn't make their intentions known. Like, everyone on Utah State either said they were in the portal publicly, or they said or was announced publicly that they were going to stay. Colorado State, I think, was the same way, where everyone said they were in the portal or everyone said they were staying. Some players didn't have that. Fresno State has 2 players that I just assume are returning because nothing was ever said about them leaving. Gonzaga, I think, had some players. San Diego State had a few players like that. So, but at this point, if they didn't say they were in the portal, and I don't have any other sources, you have social media accounts, you have other resources. Evan Mia has verbal commits. Of course, Evan Mia's list is tied to verbal commits, so I should give due credit where that's coming from. But unless it's reported somewhere that they're in, I'm going to assume if they're in the portal, I'm going to assume they're sticking around. So with all of that settled, where does everyone look in returning production rankings? And let's also take a look at where they are in transfer class ratings. Now, I wrote an article about who has the best returning production, and to be honest, I don't think anything has changed because I didn't notice any other new names in the transfer portal. So it still comes out that Colorado State ranks pretty far and away above anyone else in the Pac-12. They return 50, almost 60%. I think their lowest of the categories that I tracked: minutes, points, rebounds, assists, three-pointers made, and win shares. The lowest percent of returning production Colorado State has any of those categories, it's 57.8%. And that's in minutes played. And all the others, they're on the edge or slightly. Oh, wait, no. They're at 44% in returning assists. I don't know why I didn't notice that. It's literally right there on the sheet. So 43%, I get there. So their next closest is, then the next lowest is 57%. But they're, right alongside 60% in most of these categories. Texas State is number 2, as they return 40 to 50% in all the categories except for three-pointers, because a lot of their returning production are forwards and centers who weren't shooting as many three-pointers. Then after that, it starts trailing off pretty quickly. You have Colorado State and Texas State who are returning 40+% of a lot of their production, but Boise State, they're only returning in the 25% range. Same with Utah State, Gonzaga. Those are the teams in the middle where they return roughly a quarter of their production. And then a bunch of teams that are returning, well, you have 2 teams, Oregon State and San Diego State, they're returning about 15% of production. And then Fresno State and Washington State, who are returning next to nothing. So I guess you have like 4 tiers of returning production. Colorado State and Texas State, where you're returning a lot. Gonzaga, Utah State, and Boise State, where you're returning some, but there's a lot of production that needs to be filled. Then you have Oregon State and San Diego State, where you have maybe 1 or 2 players that you really like that are returning, but there's a ton of stuff to fill. And then there's Fresno State and Washington State, where it's like, you got to replace everything. So that's kind of where we're at with returning production. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll go over where Evan Miyakawa, his metrics, what they say about the current transfer portal class rankings for everyone in the Pac-12. It's coming up next here on the Full Court Press. Napa Auto Parts has batteries, headlights, wiper blades, all in stock and on sale now. Get Chemical Guys car wash and detailing kits for only $49.99. Again, it's all on sale at your locally owned Napa Auto Parts store. They got locations from Preston all the way down to Providence. So I want to look at recruiting or transfer portal rankings for the Pac-12. And looked these up earlier on Evan Mia, and I haven't really been referencing these because the portal is still growing. There's still players going in, and so I wanted to kind of wait until the portal was closed, and we have pretty much everyone in the portal, and then we can start looking at these. Of course, the rankings will change as teams get more players and they add more. But as things are right now, this is where everyone's rankings are, at least as of this morning. If they changed, they changed, but they probably wouldn't have changed by a ton. You'll get the idea of where they're at. The highest rated transfer class. Now, mind you, this doesn't include junior college recruits. Those weren't included in this. It's only Division I transfers that are included in this, where Evan Mia has like a projected rating for next year for the player. It's only if they're a Division I transfer. So keep that in mind. So Utah State's John Feltz doesn't actually count toward Evan Mia's rating. But Oregon State, with 6 transfers, they rank 55th nationally. Next, you have San Diego State. They have 3 recruits, and they're 79th. Then you have Gonzaga at 91st. Utah State comes in 4th with the 4th best class at 103rd, followed by Colorado State at 116. Although that doesn't include Amando Miller, who's a Division II recruit. And then Washington State at 122, Boise State at 148, and then Fresno State at 170. So a lot of these are, 2 to 3 player recruiting classes. Oregon State and Washington State have 6 and 7 apiece. Texas State does show up on the rankings. Let's see, they rank 352, which I guess, that's at the very back, but it's because they have 0 transfers. So of course they rank near the back. It's because they have yet to add anybody. So it's a to be determined for Texas State. But a lot of several teams, including Utah State, basically in that top 100. The Aggies just outside at 103. So some good transfer class rankings so far for the Pac-12. That's going to do it for us in the first hour. We'll talk a little bit more Aggie hoops next hour, but we're going to get into the Utah Jazz and Utah Mammoth. Welcome on back in to the Full Court Press second hour here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM. The Fan, streaming online at 1069thefan.com and on the 1069 The Fan mobile app, and streaming online on YouTube. I was going to say at YouTube, on YouTube. The Fan KLGN is the channel where we stream our shows from, at least the video streams. But the audio streams are obviously on the mobile app and online. And I guess if you just don't watch the YouTube stream, it's also audio, I suppose. But however you're listening, whether you're listening live, whether you're listening on the podcast feed afterward, I always enjoy hearing from the listeners. And it makes my day every time, people talk about listening to my show or talking about things that, were on show topics the other day. It's always just brings a smile to my face every single time. A few things to go over before we jump into our second hour topics. First, 8003 sent this text in before the end of the first hour saying, I was under the impression that MJ Collins was graduating. Why does 247 and On 3 have him in the portal? Is he still available, or have you heard if he is going somewhere else? So MJ Collins, I hadn't seen anything official, but like 247 On 3 have him. I'm not going to dispute him being in the portal, or at least kind of trying to enter the portal. You also have Isaac Johnson. I think Zach Keller's technically in the portal too. I think he announced that he was going to go into the portal. I think Javen Buchanan, where I think he's even committed somewhere. There are Boise State writers saying, hey, we didn't think he had any eligibility left. There are a lot of players who are entering the portal that we're kind of assuming didn't have any eligibility, and they're entering the portal anyway, partly because they're hoping that this 5 years to play 5, or they're hoping for another, positive ruling with junior college, because, Javen Buchanan came from the junior college ranks. Isaac Johnson, he also is maybe hoping for a hardship waiver or medical waiver or something, because his first year at Oregon, he only played 10 games. So maybe he's hoping for some kind of waiver to play an extra year. Zach Keller, I think his is the same as MJ Collins, where both MJ and Zach played 4 years. So if there is a fifth year that they kind of just grant to everybody in this 5 years to play 5, well, then they suddenly get another year, no questions asked. And so you have players entering the portal. So if you see someone that's in the portal and you thought, hey, I thought they didn't have eligibility, odds are you were right. But they're entering the portal because they're hoping to get another year, essentially. We actually saw this from Ian Martinez last year. He entered the transfer portal hoping he would get another year. He ended up not. He ends up going pro. So that's kind of where things are with that. 2603 saying, hey, yesterday with JD on was spicy and fun. I'm cautiously optimistic about basketball this next year. Coach needs the benefit of the doubt on the first year. Yeah, I'll give Jacobson the benefit of the doubt with his history. And yeah, obviously with JD, things did get a little bit spicy there. But that's honestly not the first time that we've gotten back and forth on topics where we need a second to cool down afterward. Because me and him were having a discussion about the Lakers and their history with draft picks and whatnot. When we were watching, I can't remember which Utah State game it was. We were watching the conference room, and kind of the same thing happened where we just needed to shut it down and stop talking about it. But yeah, as far as Utah State's recruiting, let's see what they do with these last 5 picks, and I'll give a more. I'll kind of give my verdict, because right now, if this was the entire transfer class, I'd be underwhelmed. I just have, despite the fact that I said they've brought in guys that fit, I think Utah State can do better than they currently have. And I think they will. And so that's kind of where I'm sitting, is that I think the players they've brought in will be good. I think they're missing a key piece or two, but I'm confident that Ben Jacobson will end up doing that. Wanted to talk a little bit about Utah State women's basketball as well. I mean, I put in the thumbnail Ben Jacobson and Wes Brooks, because now that the portal is closed, we can get an idea of maybe what Utah State women's basketball is doing. Again, they've got 10 players in their rotation. You can go look at my transfer tracker where I've got their roster set up the way it currently is, where they've got 10 players. They've got, how many is it? 7 returning players? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 returning players. Yeah, several players who could end up being really good for this next year's roster. So for me, as I look at Utah State women's basketball, their roster, you're probably looking for a little bit more help in the backcourt. Actually, you like some of the players they have. Aaliyah Gales, Kailani Rookstool. That's probably you're looking at your starting point guard, shooting guard. And then, beyond that, like, do you have help on the wings? Do you have help in the front court? So I think Utah State could use a little bit more depth at point guard. And then need, maybe one more player for depth on the wing, and then one more front court player. So I think Utah State, where I think most of their starting lineup is probably on the roster. I think most of the players they have right now, like, you could probably make a starting lineup out of the roster right now. I kind of started spitballing one, but Kailani Rookstool, Aaliyah Gales, Ajay, really high on Marembe and her two surnames I'm not really going to try and pronounce because I don't want to insult her and her family. But Marembe, where she's a 5'10 guard, apparently a lot of hype for her. And so might see her starting on the wing. I think Saskia Kruger may fit into the front court, but you're probably likely to see Danica Golea starting at center. And so it just comes down to, like, okay, who starts at small forward and power forward? I think that's where the biggest holes in the starting lineup, where I'm not sure. Like, I think you could see Macy Brown start at power forward or Saskia Kruger. You could see Marembe starting at small forward. I'll believe Ajay on the hype there. So maybe see her starting at that small forward spot. We'll see. I think they've got at least 3 of next year's starters on the roster, maybe 4, but you'd like to see them add a little bit of depth at point guard. Actually, to be honest, as I'm talking about this now, it's actually very similar to the men's team, where, like, the spot they need to fill is more like at small forward, backup point guard, and then maybe get yourself another center. Like this, it's basically the same thing now that I'm thinking about it. I'm a little more informed on the men's team. I don't know as much about some of these women's basketball players. I haven't scouted them as thoroughly, but yeah, I just wanted to touch base on women's basketball as well, kind of update where things are going. They may end up getting Elise Livingston back, where if they get her back, then I think you've pretty much got your guard rotation, and then you begin focusing a little bit more on small forward and getting some more depth, getting like another big, because you got a 6'3" player, 2 6'1" players, but really only one center on the roster. And you'd like to have 1 or 2 more. Ideally, you have at least 3 centers on the roster, and the Aggies basically have 1 center on the roster. So you'd like to get a little bit bigger in the front court as well. 9315 saying, can't you just post a bunch of cryptic gifts on Twitter so that we all get excited? And then eventually it'll hit and we'll agree that they were good incoming recruits from the portal. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of people who like to post, like there's the eyeball emoji. They'll post in any number of GIFs. And it's like, and mind you, there are players that I'm aware of that are on visits and that are likely to sign. Like sometimes I know ahead, but I'm not necessarily in the game of posting cryptic tweets. I know fans will do that, and I don't want to I don't want to rain on anyone's parade about wanting to, like, if they know that there's a player that's about to sign, because they talk with them, or they know a buddy that works in the athletic department that knows that, some kid's about to sign. If you want to post those cryptic tweets and posts on Instagram, I guess I just don't see the point. Like, you're just working for social media points. But I don't know. I have toyed with the idea of just with nothing behind it, just posting a cryptic tweet just to mess with people. Like, I'll post, I'd have to come up with specifically something. So maybe be warned, if I ever post a cryptic tweet, there's probably an 80% chance that future cryptic tweet is just me messing with people. Like, heck, next year I'll probably do it on April 1st or maybe March 30th just to slightly mess with people. Because, yeah, if I ever know something and I'm able to report it and say something about it, I'll just report it. There's a lot of things that I hear that I don't say because it's not my information to pass on. But yeah, maybe I could just start posting cryptic tweets and all that. 1181 saying, so if MJ Collins does get another year, does Utah State keep him? No, I doubt it. I highly doubt it. He would very likely follow Jared Calhoun to Cincinnati. As much as I think he very much loved his time at Utah State. Like, he owes his career, essentially the successful part of his career, to Jared Calhoun and his staff. And I think it would be a pretty good addition at Cincinnati. But yeah, I don't think MJ Collins could get another year, because I don't think this 5 years to play 5 thing is going to happen in time for players like this year to be impacted by it. I could be wrong. It may be moving along a little bit quicker than I think, but my impression is that this 5 years to play 5 at the earliest is going to affect next year's seniors, which I guess I should look up and see like what players may be impacted with Utah State. I think that would affect Carson Templin. Like, next year, if that 5 years to play 5 goes in and they grandfather everyone in, Mason, I think, would have to graduate because he had a redshirt year. So he would have had 5 years and he played 4 of those. Carson Templin has played every year since his freshman season. So he would get another year because he would get 5 years to play whatever he can. So, but I think that's kind of where we're at with the 5 years to play 5. So let's take a quick break here. We're close enough to taking that first break to where I'll want to get a topic transition here. I don't want to just go kind of cold for 5 minutes into the next topic. I want to talk about the Utah Jazz and kind of their situation right now. We talked a little bit yesterday about how they're guaranteed to keep their pick. They won a ping pong ball selection, a bingo draw, essentially. So we'll talk about that, and then maybe the conundrum that they could face. Me and JD had a pretty long conversation off the air about this. I can't remember how much we talked about it on the air, but we talked about this quite a bit. But it's a conundrum the Jazz could face if the lottery balls, the real lottery, instead of winning the bingo draw for the tiebreaker with the Kings, what if the actual bingo draw, the big one on May 10th or 11th, if the lottery odds fall their way, what do they do with their rotation and their starting lineup? As there could be some significant overlap between players they want to keep and the positions they play in. You only got so many minutes to hand around to potential star level players. So we'll get into that next, and we'll also later be talking about the Utah Mammoth as they evened up the series with the Vegas Golden Knights. That's starting next here on the Full Court Press. Welcome back to the Full Court Press. Jason Walker here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM The Fan. Streaming online at 1069thefan.com and on the 1069 The Fan mobile app. And a reminder, make sure to check out Birdie's Golf Lounge over on 650 North, 870 West in Logan. They got Swing AI coach systems. They got these, all these fancy launch monitors. 2,000 courses available to be played, created using LiDAR for the most realistic mapping. So basically like playing a round of golf, and with all the technology they have these days, again, they got the top of the line stuff. The top of the line stuff who's all these brand names that I'm not familiar with, like Unicore iXO2 launch monitors, all these different fancy things. And through April 30th, so you're running out of time to get this early birdie special, $129 a month with no monthly contract before opening. It's usually $260 a month, but it's only $129. So make sure to check that out. Birdie's Golf Lounge. So wanted to shift over to talk about the Utah Jazz as, we're looking at, we've got a month now, or 2/3 of the month. The draft, the lottery. Let's see, NBA. I gotta make sure I remembered this. I said it was May 10th, and I'm gonna see if Sunday, May 10th. I knew it wasn't crazy. So I guess last year, me and Eric live streamed our reactions, but that was because it happened right after our show. But it's going to air at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Did it take place last year? Like last year it took place like 6 or something. Because we literally streamed it. So I don't know. I'll probably, maybe I'll video myself. I don't know if I'll stream it, but I'll at least be videoing myself. Maybe to get my live reaction. Last year I basically had a crash out emotionally over the Jazz falling to number 5, where they could have gotten the number 1 pick and probably should have. The NBA kind of owes it to them, where the Jazz have never moved up in the lottery. They've never picked number 1. They think the highest they've picked is 3. And that was one where they've had a pick that they owned that belonged to somebody else move up, I think, because that's where they got the, I think Darren Williams and Enes Kanter were both picks that were, that the Jazz traded for that either moved up or were at number 3. Darren Williams obviously worked out a little bit better than Enes Kanter, or at least he was an all-star. But yeah, the Jazz, they're at the 4th best odds right now, and that comes by they won a tiebreaker. They literally just put ping pong balls in a little air mixer thing where bounced all the ping pong balls around, and then they drew one of them. So Utah State, or the Utah Jazz, they are guaranteed to fall no lower than 8th, which means they will be guaranteed to keep their pick. Their first round pick is top 8 protected. If it had fallen outside of that, they would have had to give it to Oklahoma City. But it literally, by the rules of the NBA lottery, cannot fall below 8th. And they only have a 2.4% chance of falling to 8. So 97.6% chance they pick in the top 7. Though I've maintained that since Adam Silver hates the Jazz and because the lottery being rigged is about the one conspiracy I believe in, they're pretty much guaranteed to fall to that 8 spot. But let's say that my misgivings about Adam Silver and Utah's lottery luck are misplaced. Let's say that the Utah Jazz end up with a top 3 pick. Let's say they end up with the number 1 pick. Or if they end up drafting one of Cam Boozer or AJ DeBonsa, where I'd really like to see them draft AJ DeBonsa because you got a kid with ties to Utah, ties to Ryan Smith, where Ryan Smith's basically bought his way through playing high school in Utah, or at least his senior year of high school in Utah, bought AJ DeBonsa to play for BYU, and obviously DeBonsa's been willing to go along. Sure, the money has helped, but he could have gotten money elsewhere. He took Ryan Smith's money. And so obviously there's an aspect of this that I think AJ DeBonsa would be a great fit for the Jazz. So let's say fate agrees, or the NBA rigging system agrees with me that the Jazz should end up with AJ DeBonsa. Where does that put the Jazz's rotation. We were talking about the Aggies rotation earlier. Where does that put the Utah Jazz in terms of like, what group are they starting? They have a lot of players right now on this team that they would like to, keep for the future and be able to put together in a viable lineup. But if you throw AJ DeBonsa in that, like where you have Walker Kessler, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Lauri Markkanen, that's your front court for next season. Where does AJ DeBonsa fit in that? Where you have two centers and a power forward playing small forward, power forward, and center. There is not room for AJ DeBonsa in the starting lineup. Ace Bailey playing at shooting guard, that's already something I have misgivings about. Where I think him playing shooting guard limits you to one, and especially if it's Ace Bailey and Lauri Markkanen at shooting guard and small forward, you have a lack of passing and playmaking. You can't have only one passer. You can't just stick four players and a point guard on the court. You need to have multiple passers. You need to have multiple people that can handle the ball, run the pick and roll, pass and distribute. You need to have, obviously your point guard's going to be your best player at it, but you need to have multiple guys on the court that are capable of doing it. And as of right now, a lot of the lineups that we're building with the current core of the Jazz are lineups that are stacked with players who aren't necessarily like the kind of connective tissue type players in terms of passing. Kelly Olynyk was kind of that. Kyle Filipowski can kind of develop into that. I think, Keontae George is kind of the maxed out version of where he's not like a true point guard, but he has enough passing and playmaking to kind of get away with playing point guard. But the Jazz's best passing lineups or at least some of the Jazz's best potential starting lineups should probably feature Keontae George as your second best passer if you can get away with it. But either way, if we move beyond that, let's say the Jazz draft AJ DeBonsa. Do you move away from one of Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and Jaren Jackson Jr.? I think you might have to. Or you maybe bring Walker Kessler off the bench, but you're likely going to be paying him $30+ million down the line. He's going to be a restricted free agent. He's likely going to get an offer sheet for a lot of money. And the Jazz, so far as I've heard, at least from people who are reporting on this, who know more about this than I do, they're reporting that the Jazz are perfectly willing to pay Walker Kessler top dollar. But if you have AJ DeBonsa or Cam Boozer on your roster, I don't think you can really afford, and this isn't necessarily strictly about money, but I don't know if you can afford to still keep all of Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and Jaren Jackson Jr. on your roster. And as much as I absolutely love Walker Kessler, I've got a signed Walker Kessler jersey sitting in my house. And I absolutely love the guy. But he may end up being the odd man out because you're paying Jaren Jackson Jr. a ton of money. That's a former defensive player of the year. He's a versatile defender at that center position. You got Lauri Markkanen, an all-star, one of the most unique power forwards we've ever seen in NBA history and very good within his role. And Walker Kessler has a lot of talent, and despite the fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. is a former defensive player of the year, I think there's an argument that Walker Kessler could be as good a defender, at least in the future, as Jaren Jackson Jr. But the Jazz gave up how many first-round picks to get Jaren Jackson Jr.? Walker Kessler was a throw-in for the trade when they were trading Rudy Gobert. So I think when you start doing the math, as much as, and I'm in this, as much as you don't want to get rid of Walker Kessler, if you end up with an AJ DeBonsa or a Cam Boozer on the roster, you kind of have to. Now, do you have to immediately get rid of Walker Kessler? Or again, if you want to pick Markkanen or Jackson, again, I think Walker just happens to be the one that you would turn to. You don't have to immediately move on from him. I think you could get away with having just, having all those players on the roster, like you don't need to immediately start jettisoning players. Just because if you get AJ DeBonta, you don't have to immediately start saying, well, we got to trade Walker Kessler or we got to trade Lowry or whatever. I think that you could honestly just bring DeBonta off the bench. No reason you couldn't do that. Or bring Walker Kessler off the bench. Like you could very much do that. Even if you were paying Lowry Markkanen $30 million a year, to say, look, we'll bring you off the bench. You'll split minutes with Jaren. We just won't be starting you. I think that's something the Jazz could very much get away with in year one of this push toward contention that they're going to be beginning next year. But it certainly makes things really interesting. If the luck goes Utah's way, they're going to have some serious conversations about, do they hang on to Walker Kessler? And that also goes for, like, what happens if they end up at if they stay at number 4? They're likely to be looking at Caleb Wilson, or maybe they go with Kingston Flemings, a point guard. They could end up drafting a point guard, someone who's a bit taller than Keontae, and we start 2 6'4" point guards in the backcourt. Maybe that's something that the Jazz end up going with. Or if they fall to 7, Darius Acuff, who is, you've heard at the top of the hour with Fox Sports, he's declaring for the draft, so you can get a point guard with Acuff. But they're like, if you're in the top 4, 3 of the top 4 spots in mock drafts typically are taken up by AJ DeBonta, Cam Boozer, and Caleb Wilson, who are all 6'9", 6'10", like power forward or small forward types. AJ DeBonta more small forward, Caleb Wilson a little bit of both, where he's 6'10", and then Cam Boozer just straight up power forward, almost a small ball center, where he's at 6'9". So again, it becomes a really interesting conundrum, but unfortunately, it's a problem that I don't think the Jazz are going to have to reckon with much. Because again, the odds are pretty low, both literally and in my conspiratorial mind, or at least conspiratorial belief in this specific case, the odds are pretty low. I think it's about a 34-35% chance they end up in the top 3. It's about 10 to 11% chance for the Jazz to end up at each of those individual 1, 2, and 3 spot. Like it's 11.5 for 1, 11.4 for 2, 11.2 for 3, then an 11% chance they stay at 4. So I guess that comes out to a 34.1% chance they end up in the top 3. And then the most likely individual selection or individual spot is 27% chance they end up at 6, which is probably where they're going to end up. Like I'll sit here on Tankathon, I'll run a sim really quick. And yeah, I just ran a simulation of the lottery and the Jazz fell to 7. Like that's just how the cookie may end up crumbling for the Jazz. Of course, that's a spot where they likely get Darius Acuff. They could draft a point guard. And that's something that would fit within the roster that they have. So that could end up working out fine for them. But if they move into that top 3, they'll have some tough but fun decisions to make. I shouldn't say fun. It's never fun to decide between which talented young players you want to get rid of because you may not have room for them. But, it's fun because you'd end up with like AJ DeBonta. That's where that would come from. Let's take a break here. When we come back, let's talk about the Utah Mammoth, as they are coming back to Utah with a 1-1 tie with the Vegas Golden Knights. Game 1 played hard. I felt like they got outplayed for a lot of it, but then they only lead 2-1 going to the third. They give up 3 goals in the third period to lose 4-2. In game 2, they trailed. Or excuse me, they were tied going into the third period. They end up getting a go-ahead goal, end up evening up the series. We'll talk about that next here on the Full Court Press. Welcome on back into the full court press. Jason Walker here as we roll along in the second hour. Going through kind of the circuit of the pro teams here. We're also going to talk some RSL, but really exciting night last night with the Utah Mammoth. Has been watching every second of Utah Mammoth playoff hockey. Watching the two games over in Vegas, was watching Sunday evening, and then watched last night as the Mammoth were able to pull off the Game 2 win. Felt like they were a few more good minutes, or maybe not committing an untimely penalty in that Game 1, away from maybe pulling off a victory in Game 1, but they end up losing. However, Game 2 had a similar flavor to the first. You're looking at a Vegas team that is playing very physical, that has very experienced players, especially for the playoffs, against a young, not as physical Mammoth team that, they're just kind of getting their feet wet with the playoffs. But they were improved, I think, in Game 2 in a couple of ways. One, I talked a lot about whether or not the Mammoth were getting the 50-50 pucks. Like every time there was a puck that was loose, it was the Golden Knights getting to it, and they were able to keep possession in their offensive zone. The Mammoth couldn't really have prolonged chances in their offensive zone. Now, there were times where like the shot counter, I think, ended up being relatively equal in Game 1, if memory serves. I might need to get fact checked on that, but my vague memory is that they're actually doing pretty well on the shot count. But still, they weren't able to capitalize on those chances, and the Golden Knights were just able to, in the end, overwhelm the Mammoth, especially in that third period, or really mostly in that third period. Because again, the Mammoth were leading 2-1 going into the third in that Game 1. I keep talking about how the Mammoth weren't playing super well in that game, but they led through the first 40 minutes. But Game 2, while it was tied a lot more, the Mammoth took the 1-0 lead, unless I misremembered that. But they took, let's see, I'm trying to look at the box score for Game 2. They took the lead. In the I'm trying to look at the goals, and I can't find. Excuse me, it was Vegas who took the lead. This is why I checked, because so they about 11 minutes in, they go down on a power play, but then relatively quickly they got a goal. I think it was another own goal. Like there were jokes about how at that point the Mammoth had scored 3 goals in the playoff series, and 2 of them were scored by Vegas. But Mackenzie Weegar gets credit for the goal. But then Dylan Guenther with a great one-time shot from the left side, found the top corner. Mammoth take the lead in the second period. But then like a minute later, this was like literally a minute later, Vegas ties it up at 2-2. But then as things got more and more intense there, they got 14 minutes into the third period before just kind of a bang-bang play where it was Dylan Guenther who was kind of coming in on goal and got a shot off, was saved. There were a lot of great saves. There's been a lot of great saves in this series by both goalkeepers. But then Logan Cooley was available for the rebound, essentially. So, Yamamoto and Guenther get the assist, but it was Logan Cooley who scores the go-ahead goal and what was ultimately the game-winning goal. And I was, sitting on my couch, punching my fist in the air as they got that goal. And then, in the last 2 minutes and 50 seconds, that's when the Knights pulled their goalie, and that was nerve-wracking. And Vegas got some pretty decent shots off in those final 2 minutes, and the Mammoth just couldn't control the puck long enough to get an open net goal, but they held them off. They win 3-2. And so that's just absolutely massive for the Mammoth. And really love them being able to be competitive in this series. Now, whether or not they win the series, I don't know. I'd probably lean towards them not winning the series. But again, like as a Mammoth fan and as a team, rooting for a team that's currently on a rebuild, this is like the one playoff series that I feel like they can be competitive in. This is a team they matched up with. I believe they won the regular season series with this team and had a similar number of points in the regular season. The Mammoth can go after Vegas and win this series. And it just becomes a question of can they do it? Can they overcome this hurdle? Can they overcome their first challenge as a playoff team, as a franchise? And that's something I think would be a big step forward. I don't really have any delusions about this team being Stanley Cup champion material. They're not. They don't have the experience. They don't have the horses quite to do that. That's something they need to build up to. But this is part of that buildup. And if you can see some success, don't go into the playoffs and have it be a participation trophy. Go out there and make some noise. Do you go the whole distance? Probably not, but make some noise. And that's something that I would really like to see. 5338 on the Young Power Sports of Logan text line saying, hey JD, Mammoth 3, Golden Girls 2. I think JD was almost rooting more for the Mammoth. We were talking about it. He seemed like when we were talking about the game last night, he was almost more excited that the Mammoth won. Although I shouldn't put words in his mouth completely, but yeah, the Mammoth beating and the way that the Vegas has kind of responded. I know there was one individual on Twitter who she tweeted something out. Let me go check this. I'm gonna pull up on Twitter, and there is something to what she said, but yeah. So it was this. I'm not gonna name her, so I don't mean to shame her, but you can probably find this tweet. But somebody sent out. It was this Vegas fan who had a couple of Utah fans sitting behind them at the game, and this person said they were cheering every time they scored. And then when they won, you'd have thought this was the Stanley Cup final. Lol. And as of right now, this post has 282 replies, 273 retweets, the vast majority of which are quote tweets, and it has 48 likes, which is pretty much the definition of a ratio. Basically, it was Vegas fans trying to talk down to Mammoth fans, people like me, for being really happy that their team got their first ever playoff win. Like Vegas is trying to act like they're better than everyone, and especially better than the Mammoth. And it's like, oh, you cheered when your team scored. How dare you? You cheered when your team got their first ever playoff win because it's a franchise that's existed for 2 years. How dare you? How dare you cheer for your team as they get a goal? As just getting a goal. Like, I can sometimes get being annoyed that the visiting fans are cheering when they're next to you. But whenever that happens to me, I'm like, I'm so I'll be sitting at a Jazz game and whatever visiting team, there's a few fans of the visiting team near me and they're cheering and I'm like mad. And I feel kind of mad at them. But to me, I'm not mad at them because I think they're dumb or I think that they should shut up. I'm mad because when they're cheering, it's because something bad happened to my team and I'm projecting that anger in an unhealthy way, which is what that person was doing. Like, of course the Mammoth fans are going to cheer, and of course it's going to be annoying to Vegas fans because they're cheering for the team that you want to see lose, and they're cheering against your team. So being a little irked when that happens, like, that's natural. But then, like, actually think it through and understand that we're all human, and let's just all make sure that we're calm about this and don't say anything stupid online. Because the internet's forever, obviously. 5253 saying Cooley is amazing, but Veggie is the MVP for sure. Yeah, Veg Melka has been, he's made so many great saves. In where the Mammoths have played, really solid defense. So they've given up 6 goals. I think 2 or 3 of them are on the power play. and one of them was an open net. So Veggie's given up 5 goals, only 3 of them, full strength across 2 games. So that's pretty solid. And I think one of the goals he gave up went off the skate of his own guy. So like Veggie's been great. He's made a lot of saves. And of course, Golden Knights have had good goaltending as well. But Veggie has been very important in this series for the Mammoth, as they've been able to play good enough defense and then scrape by on offense. 9315 saying Golden Knights fans like they're related to BYU, but it comes to things of that nature. I don't know if they're quite like BYU fans. I don't know if I would I haven't interacted with a whole lot of Vegas Knights fans, so I don't really have a great profile of maybe where they kind of fit in. That one particular individual is more like, they're kind of like some fans that I see in the Big 12, where there's a lot of weird, petty excuses. Actually, maybe they're more like Notre Dame fans. At least that one individual. I don't know. I haven't interacted a whole lot with Vegas Golden Knights social media, but I know there's some overlap between the people that I follow or at least that I see their posts of. Like there's some number of Vegas Golden Knight fans, but it's not enough to get a representative sample, because there is some, like, Vegas tries to claim a lot of Utah for its pro sports. Obviously outside of basketball and hockey before the Mammoth came here. They try and do it with the NFL. The Las Vegas Raiders try to claim Utah and get some fans there. But yeah, we'll see if Vegas gets a little bit more chippy. They've been really chippy. You had one guy saying he was going to kill Logan Cooley as they're going off the ice in game 1. We'll see if they get a little bit more angry. See if they try and fight a little bit more. We'll see how Utah manages to handle that. But we got to take one more break. When we come back, there's a pretty big game happening today with RSL. They're taking on Inter Miami and the most famous athlete that has ever competed against a Utah-based sports team. We'll talk about that next and how it may be an overreaction. I don't know. I'll have some thoughts on it coming up next here on the Full Court Press. So I've got a small rant to go on. There's a bit of nuance to it, not a ton. It more has to do, well, let's set the groundwork. Let's make sure everyone's on the same page, knows what's going on. It has to do with the fact that Lionel Messi is going to be playing a game tonight at the old Rio Tinto Stadium. I forget what they're calling it these days. The America First Field or whatever. They're welcoming Lionel Messi, who will be playing a game there for the first time ever. They'll be taking on RSL. The hometown team is welcoming in the most famous athlete who has ever competed in a pro sports league, an American pro sports league. He's more famous than Michael Jordan, more famous than LeBron James. Maybe not more famous here in the U.S., though I'd argue that Lionel Messi is just as famous as MJ or LeBron in the U.S., but, you know, leave the borders of the U.S. and it becomes no contest. It's like comparing, you know, the popularity of the Super Bowl to the World Cup. Sure, you might have an argument within the United States, but you simply lose all comparison once you leave the U.S. And so that makes Lionel Messi the greatest athlete to ever compete against the Utah pro sports team. And it's been an interesting thing to watch where RSL and is just completely leaning into this, like fawning. It's like RSL, and this is where I start to get a little bit irked. RSL as a club is basically fangirling over Lionel Messi. And so here's where the nuance is. I kind of get it. Like, I kind of understand fangirling about Lionel Messi coming to town. Heck, I remember I was watching a replay of an old NBA game. And it was a game that was played during the 80s. And a few times during the game, the color commentary was mentioning Michael Jordan, like coming to, because I think it was a Seattle broadcast, I think it was. And they were talking about a game where Michael Jordan was going to be coming to town. And they were talking about, here's the number you've got to call to get your tickets. And you got to buy a season ticket package, or it wasn't a full season ticket, but like a ticket package. And you have to call this number. It's the only way you can get tickets because Michael Jordan's coming to town. And you could, even though there wasn't any like specific, again, I've used the term fangirling, like even if that wasn't specifically there, you could tell by the way that they were promoting it, the way that they kept repeating, like, here's Michael Jordan coming to town. They're using it as a selling point. You could tell just how big a deal it was. Like, as someone who didn't live during that time period, during the prime of Michael Jordan, or I was alive for like the tail end of Michael Jordan's prime, like that's not something that I'm going to really understand is the phenomena that was Michael Jordan. But still, that was kind of like my one taste of it, is seeing kind of a flashback of what it was like the event that it was when the most exciting player that you know of as a person is coming to your team's home court. But it's not like they were the RSL is basically rolling out the red carpet figuratively. They may almost do it literally. They're acting like the king himself, like God, Jupiter himself, has descended among us mortals to play a soccer game. And it's like, I get using Lionel Messi as a promotion. I get, you get a social media post like, hey, Lionel Messi's, practicing here in Utah. I understand all that. I understand using it as a promotion, but it's felt like it's gone over the edge to, again, I use the term fangirling, which doesn't feel right for a sports team to be doing. You're supposed to be promoting your sports team, not the opponent's star player. So that's where I felt it's been a little weird. And I understand, like, if RSL feels like it's a road game because people are showing up to cheer for Messi, I get that. I'm not going to complain. It's Lionel freaking Messi. Like, I get that. But the fact that RSL, the team, is doing it, that's something that can be a little tricky. But I obviously do understand fans being excited to see Messi play their team. I get it. You should be excited. Where I thought it was a bit weird had to do with the team promotion where they were doing the fangirling and not just RSL fans who obviously know about Lionel Messi and are excited to watch him. But that's just kind of my little mini rant on that. But thank you so much, everyone, to tuning in for today's show. Glad to have you on. Have a chance to talk about Utah State a little bit more. I believe Eric Frandsen should be back tomorrow. So we'll be back to normal programming as we look ahead toward, I don't know, we're starting to get toward the dog days of summer. We're also we're going to start looking toward maybe moving the show back down to 1 hour. We're at that point of the year, though we'll maybe talk about keeping it 2 hours. We'll see. That's a discussion Eric and I will have to have once he gets back from Las Vegas. But again, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Jason Walker here on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM, The Fan, for the Full Court Press.